And the Ned is very, very excited to host this meeting with Penpa Tsering, who is this will be his first public interview with an American journalist since he was sworn in as the new Sikyong on May 27th, which is less than 3 weeks ago. Penpa is well known to many people who have joined this meeting today, having been the speaker of the Parliament of the Central Tibetan Administration, and also the North American representative of the Dalai Lama and the representative to the Office of Tibet in Washington. And he'll be interviewed by Josh Rogin, who writes a regular and widely read foreign affairs column for the Washington Post, and who is the author of the most recently of the really the most important recent book on U.S.-China relations, China, Chaos Under Heaven, Trump, Xi, and the Battle for the 21st Century. Josh tells the story in the book of his first international trip as a Post reporter in 2017 to attend the CTA's 550 Forum, which is the first ever international conference organized by the Tibetan government in exile. The conference title was a reference to the idea that the CTA would spend 5 years pursuing negotiations to resolve the status of Tibet as a country that was illegally invaded and annexed by Beijing more than 6 decades ago. And if that effort failed, to hunker down, as Josh put it in the book, for 50 years of struggle. When Josh asked his boss at the Post, Fred Hyatt, for permission to take this trip, Fred gave his consent, saying, "I hope you'll find enlightenment." I don't know if Josh did find enlightenment in Dharamsala, but he certainly found a friend in Penpa Tsering, who informed him that his name, said backwards, Rogin Josh, was a popular Indian chicken dish that they dined on together during Josh's visit. If there's going to be 50 years of struggle that lie ahead, it will be important to have a clear understanding of the challenges Tibet faces, as well as coherent approach for addressing them. Beijing's policy of committing what the Dalai Lama has called cultural genocide against the people of Tibet is certainly one of those challenges, as is its unspeakably offensive determination to impose the successor to the 14th Dalai Lama and its refusal to engage in negotiations to resolve the status of Tibet, or even to offer a meaningful response to His Holiness's third way approach. How the new Sikyong intends to address these challenges will, I'm sure, be part of our discussion today that we all look forward to with great anticipation. And it's now my pleasure to turn the floor over to my good friend, Josh Rogin.
Thank you so much, Carl, and thanks to the National Endowment for Democracy for all the work that you do promoting American and universal values around the world. It's really my honor and my privilege to be here with you and with the new Sikyong Penpa Tsering, and to help the Washington community and the greater world understand the current dire situation, both inside Tibet and for Tibetans and other ethnic minorities suffering under CCP repression and oppression all over the world. And I'd like to first start by giving the new Sikyong a chance to give a short opening statement, a few opening remarks, and then we can get right down to the issues at hand. And I turn this over right now to you, Sikyong. Please. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Josh. Thank you, Josh. Before we start the conversation, I would like to thank Carl Gershman, our very old friend who's known to the Tibetans for the last, I think, more than 27 years out of his 37 years of presidency of National Endowment for Democracy. From the time, if I recall, I think most of your association were with our common friend, Lodi Gary, because of whom you understood India and the Indian people much better than what you used to know about them, and your interest in India. Also because Tibetans are settled in, most of the Tibetans are settled in India. Throughout your presidency, the Central Tibetan Administration and the National Endowment for Tibet had, National Endowment for Democracy had a very, very strong, cordial, mutually respectful relationship with Carl personally and National Endowment for Democracy as an institution. And we are also very thankful to the American leadership, both in the White House as well as the Congress, for all their support through many decades for the Tibetans. And we see that whether it's a Republican government or a Democrat government, we have always enjoyed bipartisan support in the United States, and also bicameral support. So I take this opportunity to thank Carl again for introducing and sharing a lot of American value, which are based on democracy, human rights, and dignity for human beings, other human beings. So thank you so very much, Carl, for this. And I know that your successor is coming in a few months. So we look forward to working with him. But at the same time, it'll be a big loss for us that you are going. But we have we have confidence that we can continue our relationship with your success and with the team that you are leaving behind, Vice President Brian and our friends in the institution. So I really look forward to carrying forward the legacy that you left behind, and work with the new leadership. And thank you for all the support and help and friendship that you extended, and the many occasions that you had with His Holiness, meeting him in different places, and including your invitation to His Holiness to visit National Endowment for Democracy for your programs. So thank you very much, Carl.
Thank you, Sikyong. Thank you, Sikyong, and thank you for remembering my friendship with Lodi Gary. And we all look forward to celebrating His Holiness's 86th birthday next month together. Thank you very much. It's been a great honor.
Thank you.
Thank you both. So Sikyong, let me begin by asking you, for our Washington audience primarily, to explain what the CTA is, what its purpose is, what it does, how you can have a transfer of political power in an exile community, and how the example of having a democracy in exile has been important to both the Tibetan movement, but also as an example to other exile movements around the world.
The Central Tibetan Administration, some people call it the government in exile, but in our books, in our charter, it's the Central Tibetan Administration, which represents the Tibetans inside Tibet. We have to be the spokesperson on behalf of the Tibetans who are suffering inside Tibet, and also work for the welfare of the Tibetan in diaspora. So the main responsibility of the Central Tibetan Administration is to see how best we can resolve the Sino-Tibet conflict, and to look after the welfare of the diaspora. And the community in size is quite small in the exile community. So we are talking about 130 to 140,000 Tibetans, out of which about 10,000 are in Canada, and about 25,000 in the United States. So the United States is by far the only country which has the largest number of Tibetans, next only to India. Therefore, it's a pleasure to be talking with you, and through you reach out to the government of the United States and the people of the United States to thank them for all the help and the support they have extended to us over the years. So the introduction of democracy in the Central Tibetan setup goes way back to 1960, and that goes back to the inspiration that His Holiness got from his visit to India in 1956-57, which was also preceded by his visit to China. So, despite His Holiness' young age at that time, way back in 1951, when he took over the political and temporal rule of Tibet, even though he was very young, he got exposed to two different political systems of governance. And he was very, very, even though the Indian parliament was quite chaotic, he was very, very impressed with the freedom for the elected representatives to speak their mind. So as soon as coming into exile, not even 1 year after coming into exile, under very, very difficult circumstances, His Holiness decided to take up democracy as a system of governance for the Tibetans in exile, and he asked people to elect their representatives. So since 2nd September 1960, we had a parliament. Then His Holiness introduced constitution for Tibet in 1963 after a thorough process from 61. And since then, we have been taking small steps forward in democracy because our people had no understanding of what democracy was, what it entails, or what are the institutions that are involved in this. So His Holiness took it step by step, and the first 30 years we were mostly dependent on his leadership. And as the community developed, as there were more people who had education and good understanding of democracy, then he decided to ask the parliament to, he decided to dissolve both the parliament and the cabinet way back in 1990 and formed a constitution drafting committee. And then we had a bigger parliament in 1991. Then to have a uniqueness. In fact, we are the only community in the world which is partyless. So we are the only partyless democracy in the world.
It sounds so bad from our perspective at this moment in American democracy. Let me ask you about each of those tasks that you mentioned. One, speaking on behalf of Tibetan people inside Tibet, and two, seeking a negotiation with Beijing. On the first part, what is the latest information from the ground? What is the situation for Tibetans inside Tibet? What are the trends? What are the recent practices as part of the crackdown? And what should the international community know about what's going on inside Tibet on the ground?
I think the overall policy of President Xi Jinping is to consolidate all the powers to the central government or the Communist Party. And that is very evident in terms of its relations with the international partners, including the immediate neighborhood, where they are being very belligerent, and within China, including people in the places like Mongolia or Uyghur, which is very much highlighted in today's time, and inside Tibet, in Hong Kong, and also its relationship with Taiwan. So it's not a good pointer. I feel that they are not going on the right path. But lately, we have been hearing some noises about President Xi Jinping asking all the embassies around the world to improve the image of the Chinese government internationally. But without resorting to the core values that the international community cherishes, it will not be possible to please the Western nations to improve the image of China and its leaderships and policies. So just like in other parts of China, dealing with its nationalities, we also face the same problems, but it's not so much visible because of the currency of emerging situation in Uyghur or Hong Kong. So the Tibetan issue has taken a little backseat, but the ongoing destruction and devastation of the identity of the Tibetan people, which concerns the Tibetan language, Tibetan religion, Tibetan territory, and more importantly, the Tibetan environment, which concerns not only the Tibetans on this plateau called the roof of the world, but also all the neighboring countries, including Pakistan, China, Burma, Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, Vietnam, and China itself. So even though the rate of self-immolation that has started in 2009, more than 150 Tibetans have self-immolated without harming a single Chinese. So they were driven to this to the level of frustration that they have to take their own life for the freedom of the Tibetan people. That has come down a little bit, mainly because there is a lot of restriction from the Chinese government. So if I have to go into detail on each of the issues, it's going to take a lot of time, but all I can say
No.
is
I want to ask you to do
that the situation continues to be very, very grave. And that is also the reason why we say we don't have time. So the demographic aggression that's happening inside Tibet. So I also tell my compatriots who advocate independence for Tibet that another 20, 30, 40 years down the line, if we are not able to go back to Tibet, even autonomy may not make sense. So that is the level of urgency that we are talking about inside Tibet.
I understand. Thank you very much. I remember clearly in 2017, the 550 forum, and the idea was to take 5 years to explore a new dialogue with Beijing. Well, it's almost 5 years now. How's it going? Are there any signs that Beijing is interested in such a resumption of dialogue? And are there any tools that you have to take practical steps towards advancing that dialogue?
So it has been just only 15 days that I came to take office. I still have a lot of information to catch up, particularly from the private office as to the number and the level of contacts they have with the Chinese government. And I'm willing to explore all kinds of channels to reach out to the Chinese government. So it's quite early to talk about specific strategies or specific mention about specific channels that we may have or might look forward to have. But definitely we will be trying to seek a lasting, mutually beneficial, non-violent solution to the Tibet issue through the third way, as Carl calls it, or the middle way, as Buddhists calls it, or the Tibetans calls it, the middle way path or the middle way approach. So through this, we hope that better sense will prevail over the Chinese leadership that Tibetan issue is and will be the most easiest issue to be resolved, because we are not resorting to any kind of violence. We have addressed their main concern of not separating from China, but willing to live within the framework of the Constitution of People's Republic of China. So with that basis, they so far they have the response from the Chinese government has mostly to create more and more challenges and obstacles for the Tibetans and putting more conditions for the dialogue to move forward. So I think if better sense prevails over the Chinese leadership, there will definitely be a way forward. And one of the issues that His Holiness wishes, and also His Holiness has said it many times, including during my audience about 10 days ago, that he would like to visit China on a pilgrimage. He would also like to see his hometown in Taksir in Amdo, and he would also like to visit Lhasa. But till such a time that there is freedom in China and in Tibet, it will not be possible for him to live there or stay there. So with that, that is a clear indication of where we intend to go. And one of the promises I made during my campaign, during the elections, was to reach out to the Chinese government in whatever capacity and through whoever it is, for His Holiness to go to China, visit China, and that will also provide an opportunity for His Holiness to meet with the Chinese leadership, have a one-to-one straight talk, sincere talk, and I'm sure there will be a path forward for us to work on it. So this is something that we are focusing on right now at this moment.
Fascinating. Thank you. It strikes me that if we look at what's going on in Hong Kong, uh, international confidence and the idea that you can have limited autonomy inside of China, whether or not you call it one country, two systems or middle way approach or whatever, that space is shrinking. And I'm wondering, as you look at the crackdown in Hong Kong and the broken promises there, uh, does that indicate to you that perhaps that has an implication for Tibet, that a real middle way approach may be less possible, maybe less likely, considering how the Chinese Communist Party is acting in Hong Kong?
That's why I keep saying, if better sense prevails on the Chinese leadership, because right now what they're doing doesn't make sense to any one of us, except for the Chinese leadership themselves. So what they're doing in Hong Kong was completely contrary to international conventions and the agreements that they've signed with UK and the promises they have made for the Hong Kong people. And that doesn't help inspire other nationalities to look for negotiated settlement or settlement that is agreeable to both. The whole idea of the Chinese government is to rule with an iron hand. Now, how long can that go on in this 21st century? How long can the Chinese government keep control on information or movement of people? So there has to be a certain level of transparency, freedom on information, freedom of information, and freedom of movement. Uh, there is so much mistrust with the Chinese leadership, whether it's with the international community or within China itself. That's also the reason why over the last more than one decade, China is the only country that spends more money on internal security than international defense expenses. So that is a reflection of how jittery the Communist Party is against their own people. That is also the reason why I think they are keeping these flashpoints with India or with its neighborhoods in the South China Sea or with Japan or with Taiwan, so that if something happens that become precarious for the Communist Party to sustain, then they will have this flashpoint to come into action and then raise nationalism within the people. So I don't think it'll be very, very long for the Chinese leadership to either understand and mend ways or be dethroned. So those are the only two options left. So
How
the
long?
one good thing when you talk about consolidation, again, one person becomes very powerful, but at the same time, that person also have to take the responsibility for any failure of the government. So they should be ready to take on both. How long? It's very difficult to say. I don't have a crystal ball. Neither can I go to the lamas for divinities as to when this is going to happen. But this is inevitable because we believe in the law of impermanence, and change is the only constant. So
That's
therefore,
true.
change has to happen. There is no choice.
Thank you. Thank you. I remember when I had the chance to ask a question of His Holiness in Dharamsala, I asked him about the U.S. government at that time run by President Trump. And he said two things. He said America First was, quote unquote, not very nice. But he also said that the American people have a role in promoting democracy and freedom. And I'm wondering, as you look at Washington under the Biden administration, what do you want them to do? What are your asks of Washington, of Congress? What are your specific requests that the U.S. administration and Democrats and Republicans could reasonably hope to accomplish to help Tibet and the Tibetan cause?
Over the years, we have seen from 2002, the adoption of Tibet Policy Act, going back to 1997, the first appointment of the special coordinator for Tibet in the State Department. So that's almost more than 2 decades since we had very helpful relationship with the American government. Over the last few years, we had the reciprocal access to Tibet bill. Then again, the amended version of the 2002 Tibet Policy Act, which is now the 2020 Tibet Policy. And U.S. is the only country that has an act where the State Department or the government or the White House has to report to the Congress every year on the status of what is provided for in the act. And I really thank the leadership in the Congress and the White House for adopting these measures. Of course, we would like the United States or other countries who knows about the Tibetan history, the situation inside Tibet, to be more vocal about the past status of Tibet as an independent state. That is because that will, I think, help in putting the Tibet issue on a platform whereby the middle way approach is one of the leveraging points to take it to a logical conclusion to find a solution for the Tibetan issue. So having said that, again, we would expect that the appointment of the special coordinator, who has already been confirmed by the Senate but needs to be confirmed by the full Senate in the days to come, and her leadership will be, if she is designated as, Uzra Zeya is designated as the special coordinator for Tibet, we really look forward to her leadership in working with many other like-minded countries around the world, because we cannot expect to work with other authoritarian regimes. We can only work with democratic countries around the world. And we do see a certain level of shift in the European government's approach to the Chinese government. So this is something that we will need to discuss with the US leadership to take along or to work along with the like-minded countries, democratic countries around the world. This is something that we will be really looking forward to replicating what the United States has done for the Tibet issue.
Thank you. In 2007, I attended the Congressional Gold Medal ceremony. George W. Bush, Nancy Pelosi, Robert Byrd, all came together, Mitch McConnell, to give this award to His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Of course, the last administration was the first time that a U.S. president didn't actually meet with His Holiness the Dalai Lama. When the COVID permissions permit, does His Holiness have a plan to come to the United States and meet with President Biden?
I think that will depend a lot on what the situation commands at that time. I'm sure there are many issues that President Biden and His Holiness shares in common for the good of the people, of all the people in this world, not just the Tibetans, because when His Holiness normally meets with leaders of different countries, his focus most of the time during the discussion is always spent on the benefit of the whole humanity, humanity as a whole, not just the Tibetans. The Tibetan issue becomes just a part of that discussion. So if His Holiness physical conditions allows for long journeys, I'm sure he would be very happy to meet with President Biden and discuss on universal issues that concerns humanity. But it's very difficult to say as to when that could happen, and it will also depend on how the White House approaches this issue. Definitely there could be occasions, but I cannot promise anything.
Very interesting. Thank you. Do you think the Biden administration and the U.S. Congress should apply more pressure to the Chinese government in order to encourage it to enter into negotiations with the Central Tibetan Administration? In other words, do you think there should be more sticks and less carrots, including coming from Washington on this issue?
Sticks and carrot divide and rule is a policy that the European colonialists used against the Asians in the when the colonialism was spreading. But that same stick and carrot is being used against the European Union nations because of their dispersal in foreign policy initiatives or joint efforts within Europe. I would not say put pressure, but at the same time, I would really hope for better interventions from. We all know that Chinese government doesn't appreciate third-party intervention or foreigners getting involved in their what they call as domestic internal problems. But whenever, hypocritically, whenever it's convenient for them, then they also get involved in other domestic issues of other countries. So there are many paradoxes in Chinese approach. But I would definitely say any kind of intervention in resolving the Sino-Tibet conflict is welcome, and China should not see intervention from other parties as interference in their domestic affairs, but in helping hand in increasing their moral authority, which is the only thing they lack. Today they have military power, they have political power, they have monetary power, but the only thing they lack is moral power, which is only because of the distrust that they themselves have created. So if they change, I'm sure there will be a lot more things going on, not just with Tibetans or Uyghurs or Mongolians, but very beneficial for the whole of China. That the whole world expected them to do to become a more responsible world leader after or at the time when China was became a part of the World Trade Organization. But things right now doesn't seem to be moving in that direction. So let's hope that China will have a turnaround and then join the world community and leading it in a manner that is acceptable to everybody on this world, not just for the Chinese leadership, but for the people around the world.
Excellent, thank you. As you know, Sikyong, many people around the world are watching the Chinese Communist Party prepare to appoint what will essentially be a fraudulent, a fake reincarnation of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And it seems that Beijing is proceeding with these plans in the same way that they did, of course, with a fake Panchen Lama so many years ago. What are you guys doing? What is the CTA doing to prepare for that and to counter that? And can you tell us about how far along you are in thinking about that, please?
Even the Central Tibetan Administration, I don't think we can play, the Central Tibetan Administration cannot play a role in choosing the reincarnation of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, because that is purely religious matter.
Understood.
That has to follow religious rituals and a lot of divinations and other things that are involved. And I personally am not a leader of a tradition. I'm not a lama or a reincarnated lama. That responsibility lies particularly with His Holiness, because the whole concept of reincarnation is for that person to be reborn to continue his work that remains unaccomplished or that needs to be strengthened. So it is up to His Holiness the Dalai Lama as to where he will be born and how he will be born, and he will definitely leave indications as to where he will be born. Even now, he says, I will be born in a free world. So I think that is very indicative of what His Holiness is thinking, and where his reincarnation will come is a matter that will need to be taken up when the right time comes. And His Holiness will definitely leave those. And apart from that, what His Holiness said in September of 2011 still stands. The issue of His Holiness reincarnation is now not just related to Tibetans, because the follower of His Holiness has extended beyond the boundaries of Tibet in Mongolia and some republics of Russia the Himalayan belt, and now we have more and more relations with Buddhists in China, in Korea, Japan, and most of the Southeast Asian countries. And you have many people who like His Holiness Dalai Lama all over the world. So it has become a much bigger issue than just Chinese leadership using it as a political tool to manipulate their or try to impose legitimacy over the Tibetan people through the control of reincarnation. And if we go back to Chinese claims, I can only say that the 11th Dalai Lama was the only one that was chosen through the golden urn. The 9th and the 11th, they were chosen through the golden urn, but even before that process started, it was already confirmed that they are the incarnates of the previous Dalai Lama. So all these rhetorics and squeaking of the historical facts doesn't help. It's very important that we stick to facts and truth and be more responsible towards your own people so that you don't create any more injuries in the heart of the people that you rule. So if you're really concerned about the people you rule, then you should be concerned about the aspiration of the people, not just impose your own will. So far, the biggest problem with the Chinese leadership is they fail to understand the real aspiration of the people, whether it's the Tibetans or the Uyghurs, because throughout so many centuries, we have been Buddhists, and it's ingrained in our brain to be Buddhist. And that is something that everybody cherishes. But when you stamp on the freedom of that part, that includes Tibetan language, then it's very difficult to win the heart of the people. It's not possible to win that. Even after 60 years, the spirit of the Tibetans inside Tibet remains very, very strong. So material development, which is the mantra of the Chinese government, to resolve any kind of conflicts, it's not the only way forward. They need to understand the aspiration of the people more than anything else.
Thank you very much. I remember 2008, the Beijing Olympics was a time of great suffering and strife in Tibet for Tibetans. Protests, crackdown that led to the increasing surveillance and repression and harsh conditions inside Tibet. Now, as we look towards the 22 Olympics again in Beijing, what do you see? Do you see this as another opportunity for the world to speak up about human rights inside China? Do you see this as another opportunity for Beijing to clamp down and increase its repression? And do you believe the world should boycott the 2022 Olympics in Beijing, as many in Washington are suggesting?
When China bid for the Olympics, for the 2008 Olympics, starting from the year 2000, 2001, that was also the period when U.S.-China trade relation was signed, and China, the CACC was also formed. Congressional Executive Commission on China was also formed because of this. Then China became part of World Trade Organization, and there were a lot of expectations from different world leaders on how to approach with China and see if they can be part of responsible global leadership. But that has not happened. And 2008 was a great grand coming out party for the communist leader to be, to showcase to the world that this is what they can do. And it was a huge matter of prestige for them. And that could be one reason why the dialogue process started in 2002, and immediately after the Olympics was over, that fizzled out in 2010. So we can definitely understand how China strategized to minimize international opinion on them by just having show the facade of conversation or dialogue, but on the ground really not happening and no improvement whatsoever. Practically. So this time it's a little different. China is a lot more powerful, a lot more stronger than it was in the beginning of the century. So the sports is always a very contesting, very sensitive issue, because sports is one thing, politics is another thing, but then everything is so interdependent, as we say in Buddhism. that you cannot leave one item out and just consider the other one, because everything is related. So participating in Beijing Olympics, it kind of connotes to a certain level of accomplice in joining their effort. So if the world community is really serious about bringing China or making China accountable for what else they are doing, then a more comprehensive approach is necessary, whether it's sports or whether it's economy or other things. So I think right at this moment, it's not the Tibetans who have to request governments or sports body not to participate in Beijing Olympics, but I think the leadership is coming out from the different nations. We are becoming a part of chorus that we were leading way back in the beginning of this century. So we are happy that the world community has finally understood that this is something that they have to be really very careful about.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, you're saying that the world should boycott, but not because the Tibetans are asking them to, but because it's the world should stand up for human rights based on its own values. Am I hearing you correctly? Is that what you're saying?
I believe that there is more realization within the international community that the strategies and the methods that they have adopted to involve China into the international community has not produced the result that they expected. So when things don't go in the right direction, when you are not able to achieve something, then it's inevitable that you have to look for other ways and means to make them accountable. So I think this is another way of doing things, and let's see how it impacts not just China, but the whole global politics in this very fluid situation.
I understand. Thank you. I want to pose to you a couple of questions from the audience, but before that, I'd just like to ask you a couple more questions about what's going on inside the Tibetan community. You know, one of the things that I've come to know over my years of interacting with the Tibetan community is that, you know, among Tibetan youth, there's increasing frustration and increasing calls for a more aggressive, more independence-minded strategy, increasing frustration with Beijing, rather that they feel that this middle way approach has been abused by Beijing to keep the Tibetan movement from seeking a more aggressive, more independence-minded strategy. And I'm wondering, as you start to lead as you rise into the leadership of the political leadership of this community, what do you think about that, and how do you plan to speak to Tibetan youth about their concerns and their views on this, and how do you plan to incorporate that into the overall community's strategy for survival, resilience, and struggle?
I think it's in a democratic setup. Different views, different opinions on how to resolve things is always there. It's not just within the Tibetan community, it has been with every struggle that the world has witnessed over many centuries. So therefore, it's nothing new for the Tibetans, or it should not be anything new for the international community that we have different sets of people believing in different things. But we can say as a democratic community, practicing democratic polity, the parliament has approved this unanimously in 1997, and His Holiness reinforced his vision on this. And the general public, who are not so vocal or visible on social media or any other platforms, with the middle way approach that is there. But the younger generation feeling frustrated is very much also understandable, because that is also a point that we keep, I think, referring to the Chinese government, that the frustration comes out of no commitment from China. So if they are responsive towards the middle way approach, then I'm sure the younger generation would also understand what is happening. But on the other hand, also as youth, I'm sure when Carl was young, or when you were young, or when I was younger, then we had different ideas. But when you join political career, and then when you are exposed to so many situations, and when you get this opportunity to have an overall holistic view of the ground realities that is happening in Tibet, in China, or internationally, then you realize that, okay, we need to have a pragmatic approach, and the approach that His Holiness has adopted, not just proposed, not decided overnight. It's a matter that he has been considering over the years, over the meeting with world leaders, and discussing this issue with experts and so many things. So we still remain very firm on the middle way approach, because there is nothing wrong with the middle way approach. The only thing wrong with the whole thing is how is China responding to the pragmatic approach of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. So this also, I'm sure the younger generation understands, but there may be areas that we can assist the younger generation. And that's also one reason we have this a huge plan to launch a Tibet advocacy group campaign all around the world. On the one hand, we have a huge social and demographic change happening in the Tibetan diaspora. Tibetans moving out of India and Nepal to the Western countries. So these days, you find Tibetans in more than 25 different countries, and they have become citizens in those countries. They speak those languages, they understand the system. So we have a huge potential there as Tibetans to lobby for Tibet, and this is what we are planning to harness, to work together with particularly the youth, of course, not limiting age, but provide opportunity for any single Tibetan who would like to contribute to or work together with other Tibetans. That is something that we will really be officially launching, and it will be my personal effort to meet with every youth group or single youth wherever I go, wherever I travel, in any part of the world, wherever we have a Tibetan community, and we have to be the bridge between the older generation and the new generation that is coming up. So it's very, very essential that the youth are also informed. So when people take informed decisions, then we cannot be wrong. When we take decisions based on half of the information then we lack in certain areas. So this is something, it's a challenge, but it's achievable that we can work together.
Understood. Thank you so much. This is sort of a composite of some questions that we are getting from listeners. I have received different variations of this basic question, which is basically that at what point would you have to conclude that the Chinese Communist Party has rejected the diplomacy toward the middle way approach, and what would be the signal that wasn't going to work, and then is there a plan B? Well, what other approach could there be after that?
Now, as a matter of policy, it's not something that the Sikyong addresses by himself, or the cabinet decides as to what can be done. As I mentioned before, we have our own peculiarity in the formation of our government and the systems that are the organs of the democratic institutions that we have in place. So it has to be, if there is anything new that we have to adopt, then there has to be a referendum with the public, and then approved by the parliament. So I was asked this question after I assumed office, the article that appeared on Global Times, where they have asked questions to the former United Workfront head, who always comments on Tibet issue. He's the most regular guy from the Chinese government to talk on the Tibet issue, and always very negative towards any positive approach that we are taking. And then there was also this other scholar who was interviewed. But I do not consider that as the official position of the Chinese government. If the Chinese government wants to really convey what they have in mind, whether it's from the foreign minister or from the president himself, saying that we are no longer interested in talking with the Tibetans or finding a solution, then I think that will be a historical thing for us to reconsider as to what we need to do till such a time that there is an official confirmation. Because whatever is coming out, under the communist system, there are a lot of postures they make. So that kind of misleads the whole international community or their own people, because they have various means of doing it to mislead the international community or to mislead their own constituency within the country. So as far as I'm concerned, as long as there is an emphatic statement from the Chinese leadership that we are no longer interested in negotiated solution, or we are no longer interested in the non-violent movement of the Tibetan people to resolve the Tibetan issue, then there has to be a rethinking, and that will happen within the community. It's not in the hand of Sikyong alone. It has to be a democratic process.
Excellent, thank you. The next question comes from Penpa Tsering, Regional Refugee Affairs Specialist for South Asia for the Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration at the U.S. State Department. Congratulations, Penpa says, to Sikyong Penpa Tsering
Thank you.
for being elected as Sikyong. The question is, quote, I would like to know how the CTA and your administration view the Indo-Pacific strategy. This is the new strategy document that was put out by the Trump administration to signify our latest pivot to Asia. We always have a pivot to Asia, but this is the most recent one anyway. And have you looked at that, and what are the viable advantages that the CTA or your administration can take from that document, from that change?
The whole pivot of the Trump administration, moving it towards the Indo-Pacific region, in the beginning was little sketchy because of the scrapping of the regional cooperation agreements, but at the same time focusing on the area, I think is mostly because of what China is doing in the South China Sea. It's all compounded by China's own action by building airstrips on islands that didn't exist before, or creating problems with all its neighbors, whether it's Vietnam or Philippines or Malaysia, Brunei, Australia, Taiwan, whoever it is. So, and also since the whole area is a major maritime route, it really concerns the international community on the movement of goods and services in that area. So I think it's very, very important for China, for America to be involved in this. Otherwise, all these countries in the neighboring areas are like small fishes for the big fish to gulp down. So I think in defense of that whole region, American intervention is very, very important, and the whole Indo-Pacific pivot that the administration has undertaken has also now led to new initiatives, including the Quad. So these are very, very important developments that I've been witnessing over the last 1-2 years in joint exercises. So it's not just the Quad is not involved only in military cooperation, but also in trade and other areas. So there are a lot of dynamics happening. And it's so very fluid and so very fast. Let's see what happens when the pandemic ebbs and things come back to normal. I think that we're going to see a lot of changes in the whole geopolitical or geostrategic region in the Indo-Pacific.
Understood. And since you brought up the pandemic, and I think this will be the last question, and then perhaps I'll turn to Carl for a quick closing remark. But since you brought up the pandemic, I have to ask you, the entire world is dealing with a pandemic that began in China, and the Chinese government's and the Chinese Communist Party behavior throughout the pandemic, I think, has shocked a lot of countries in a lot of different ways. And I'm wondering what is your observation of how the Chinese government, the Chinese Communist Party, has handled this crisis, especially internationally, and what should that tell us, in your view, about the party, about the Chinese government as it is right now, about what we're dealing with, and how is that informed by their actions during this pandemic?
I cannot be a judge on something that I'm not an expert on. So I'm not a scientist, I'm not a doctor to ascertain who did what or from where it leaked to where, but it does keep occurring in my mind that the China is the highly dense populated, most populous nation in the world, and you have this pandemic, and according to Chinese records, only about a little less than 100,000 people got infected, and so that is a puzzle for me. And the virus going out of China to different countries, including US, Brazil, United States. Of course, we may have lacked in certain preventive measures, but the whole virus coming into the whole world and creating a lot of panic among the people, but not so much inside China itself. So that is a little concerning for me as to how it's happening from the origin, not so much effect, but to all other countries, so much effect. So, but the whole process of the international, the international community's concern in trying to find out its origins and all that, very opaque. And I understand that there was not much cooperation from the Chinese government to do a real subjective or objective study on the origin of the virus or all that. So I'm not an expert. You have written a book on there. I'm sure you have covered that issue also. You know better, but we remain concerned about the opaqueness of the Chinese system that always puts challenges before the international community to get to know the truth, whether it's the pandemic or whether it's human rights situation or anything that's going wrong inside China. Everything is hidden. Can you think of any other country where a 6-year-old child was lost, taken away with his family way back in 1995, and now after 26 years, you still don't know where the child is? So such is the system of Chinese government. So that is I think, very good example of how they can keep their secrets and keep the international community away from understanding the reality of the situation.
Sikyong, thank you so much for your time. The Tibetan cause is the cause of human dignity and democracy and freedom and human rights and the enlightenment and liberty. And these are things that you've dedicated yourself to in your public service. I'd like to thank Carl Gershman for his decades of public service to advance those important values and his help to me personally throughout the years. And I'd like to give you the last word, Carl. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Josh.
Carl, are you on mute?
Thank you, Josh, and thanks so much for conducting this important interview with the Sikyong. And one of the important points I think he made was the inevitability of change. He talked about the law of impermanence and the need for the Chinese government either to understand the situation, or he used the word dethroned. And I think, your question at the end, Josh, about the pandemic is extremely important, because we could be on the verge of a real change where the US is probably going to really try to help vaccinate the entire world. And who knows how this is going to change the understanding in the world and the narrative. But we're on the verge, I think, of a period of change. I think that's going to be necessary to resolve the issue of Tibet. And the one thing I realized from this conversation is how deeply committed the people of Tibet are to preserving their own identity, and not to give up, which I think is the most important thing. And the Sikyong, I think, represents that very, very significant identity of the Tibetan people. And I join with him and everyone in wishing His Holiness a happy 86th birthday. I think he's a very young 86. And we'll celebrate that on July 6th together. Thank you very much, Sikyong. Thank you, Josh. And thank you, everyone, for participating in this meeting.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.